Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Chamber Connection. Have you ever wondered about the role your provincial chamber plays in the broader chamber ecosystem and how you can leverage this relationship to benefit your chamber? Well, you're in luck today. In this episode, we're sitting down with two standout leaders, Chuck Davidson, President and CEO of the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce, and Dan Tisch, President and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. In this episode, we talk about the dynamics of provincial chambers, exploring their impact, and some best practices for local chambers. Settle in and enjoy the conversation.
All right, welcome back for another wonderful edition of the Chamber Connection podcast. I'm Stephen Chakota. I'd also like to welcome you all on behalf of our spectacular host, Melanie Fraser. And we're really excited that you could be here for us. This is a really important topic. It's going to be really engaging and enlightening for you. We want to kind of tackle that idea of the roles between chambers and how does a provincial chamber play their role within the network, and how do we leverage from a local chamber relationship that relationship with the provincial chamber. So first up, I'd like to welcome and put the spotlight on Chuck Davidson, the president and CEO for the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce. And this guy, if he's not in your favorite top 5 people, he definitely will be after this. So
Wow.
Chuck is a true leader. He has his finger on the pulse when it comes to a lot of issues. And I'm not sure, I won't put him on the spot for this one, but I'm not sure if he even knows how many boards and committees he's actively on right now. He is super busy, and I'm not sure how he gets it all done. And he definitely looks for things from a relationship lens, which explains why he's been able to get a lot accomplished in his time at the Manitoba Chamber's helm. And he also don't think that he's a one-note guy, but can also raise some capital as well. So make some pretty good deals working with a lot of organizations and the provincial government. So heck of a radio voice too. You're going to be ready for that one. And wherever you are, no matter how you're listening to this, let's put a round of applause and welcome in Chuck Davidson. Thanks for being here, Chuck. I'm going to pass it up to
It's,
Melanie here.
that's quite the introduction.
Oh, no pressure. Hey, Dan. Oh my goodness. I'll be right back. No.
And this to my mom, I think, after.
Well, I'm equally as excited to introduce the president and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. My chamber is located in Ontario. So, Dan, welcome to the podcast. I'm always, really struck by what a great communicator you are. And I know you've got a great background both in government and in public relations. You've been a standout in that regard, and you come to the Ontario Chamber with a ton of that experience. I see you 24/7, I think, on the radio and TV right now. So hopefully you still have some voice left today for us. But what's really struck me is your ability to handle crisis and to be the voice of the Ontario Chamber in such for those who don't know, we're recording this during the tariff crisis of 2025, so we're all a little busy. But want to welcome you. You've been a great voice for Ontario business. You're a mean euchre player. I know that firsthand. And you have probably the best Trump impression I've ever seen. So hopefully you can maybe, show us that a little bit later. But welcome to you both. We're really happy to have you both with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Melanie. With hope we won't have the great tariff crisis of 2026, 27, and 28, but one never knows right now. So
That's
great.
right. That's right. And Steve had mentioned that we really, when we're talking to other chamber leaders or chamber staff within the network, and this is right across the country, a lot of people don't understand, especially as they're coming into the role, what the difference is between, the Canadian Chamber, the Ontario Chamber, and the local chamber, and what each of those chambers serve to their membership, and then also provincially how they can help their local chambers. So we wanted to have you both on so we can chat about that. So if you're okay, we'll just jump in with a couple of questions, and then we'll just talk freely, and feel free to interrupt us and each other, and we'll go from there. So Dan, I'll start with you, and then Chuck, maybe you could take it. Maybe you can talk primarily what you see as the functions and the role of a provincial chamber and how they differ from a local chamber. And then maybe speak to what unique challenges that you would face at the provincial level and how that would compare to the local landscape.
Sure. No, thanks, Melanie. Yeah, no, it's very important to understand, I think, that we all share a brand, right? And we actually did a survey recently of business leaders in Ontario just to understand the reputation of the Ontario Chamber, local chamber, national chamber, and the good news is the reputation is very strong, right? Of all of these chambers, right? People who are aware of their local chamber of commerce, their provincial, their national, they think very well of it, right? But they don't really understand the difference. And because chambers association with one another is essentially voluntary, right? It's important for us to understand that because when people think of the Chamber of Commerce, there's not a lot of differentiation between those different levels. And that really creates an imperative for us to work together, right? At the Ontario Chamber, we actually spent a lot of time consulting with local chambers last year to articulate contemporary sense of our message and why we exist and what our mission is. And the mission we came up with, which is a slight evolution on what we've used before, is that we see our role as convening, mobilizing, and empowering business and local chambers to lead positive change, because this is something that no one can achieve alone, right? So we do this through policy analysis, we do this through insight and advocacy, we do it through services to both our chambers across Ontario. We have about 150 chambers in Ontario, and our corporate members. And finally, we do it through programs that actually deliver services and support to small and mid-sized businesses. And so I would say the difference is local chambers, understandably, are invaluable because they're the feet on the street, right? They're the brains, in the local community, right? They're understanding and analyzing and addressing the needs of businesses at the local level. They're offering networking opportunities. They're doing local advocacy. They're engaging with their local mayors and councils and their community, right? And I think we have a better understanding now that and this comes to circle back to our purpose, right? The purpose we articulated. It's about achieving inclusive and sustainable prosperity for businesses, workers, and communities. And the reason that we use those three words at the end is because increasingly there's an understanding, I think, that our advocacy can't just be about businesses, that we have to unapologetically make the case that healthy and strong businesses, particularly at the local level, lead to incredible benefits for workers, job opportunities, career opportunities, growth, income, everything that comes with that, and strong communities. So to me, it all fits together.
Yeah, our tagline at our chamber is connecting business, connecting community, because you can't have one without the other. I love that. Chuck, what about you? What do you see in your time at the Manitoba Chamber?
Yeah, I mean, and it's sort of building on what Dan kind of talks about as well. What I've always, when I go and speak with local chambers, I always try to, the way that I position it with local communities and local business owners, we're really the umbrella organization. So we've got 65 chambers of commerce here in Manitoba. I don't expect them all to be at the same level. And really what we play is more of a support mechanism for them. And so, and I think building on what Dan kind of talked about as well, how I always position is a little bit more from the advocacy perspective, is that I'm not going to go into a Parkland chamber or an Altona chamber and tell them how to run their business. I'm not going to advocate to their local government on their behalf. Typically, I'm going to stay in my lane. My lane is more dealing with provincial issues. And again, that's where we've developed those relationships. We've got regular, conversations with various government leaders. But I think where the importance is, and when I have those conversations in these smaller communities, is letting them know that we're providing that voice for them on behalf of the business community. So issues that are being brought forward at the local chamber are then funneled up to the Manitoba Chamber, and we can act on their behalf. And I think that's really the importance of this and why the chamber network has been so important from an advocacy perspective, because there's no other organizations that do this. When you look at other business organizations, they don't have the same framework in terms of getting that input from local business owners, being able to identify potential solutions, and then being able to have those conversations with decision makers, which in the most part are trying to find solutions. And I think that's really where the important role that the Chamber of Commerce network can play is that relationship. The other thing that we do too is that the importance of us having those relationships with all of the different chambers is that we get this unique ability to see what chambers are working well and what chambers are struggling, and to be able to share some of that information with other chambers. A lot of times I'll go into a chamber and they may be struggling, and I'll have a bit of a conversation and, plan a half day or something along with them to understand, okay, what are you currently focused on as an organization? And, I'll find out certain things. Okay, we're doing, our main initiative is we're looking after the flower baskets in our community.
Right.
And we're doing these kind of initiatives. Go, well, that's not really necessarily supporting your local business community. That's more of it's kind of a feel good. Let's focus in terms of what your business community is looking for. So sometimes it's providing them with a little bit of direction and then some suggestions in terms of here's what's working well with other chambers that you might want to undertake. So those are some of the unique positions that we get the ability to have with chambers, is what can we do to help make them more successful based on the fact that we're on a regular basis having these conversations with chambers on almost a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just build on that? I
Mhm.
think that's such a good point about the best practices and knowledge sharing and the raising of the bar that enables. And then the other point that Chuck made me think about when he talked about focusing on the provincial lane is, it struck me in the time I've been on this job now 13 months, a lot shorter than Chuck. But I've really been struck by how local issues, once you aggregate them, connect to provincial priorities, right? And how I think we've been able to provide, I think, some incredible collaboration with local chambers to get stuff done and to get stuff on the agenda, that to be done in the future that can benefit local communities. So I think of the joint advocacy that we've done with our local chambers around how mental health and addictions and homelessness issues are affecting local businesses and local communities, right? I think about advocacy around, for instance, Highway 69 up to Northern Ontario, how, we co-signed a letter with our provincial or local chambers who are affected by that, right? Or I think of our Mining Policy Council, where, a number of northern communities are directly involved in the council and providing, advice and support, right? So there's so much that where by focusing on the issues we do, we can actually help make the case for essential investments or policy or changes that can benefit those local communities. So I'm really interested by that interaction. Another example would be the collaboration that we've had with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, right? To advance some municipal issues, but at the provincial policy level, right? So there's a lot there, I think, where that collaboration is essential, right? Chambers won't be as effective without us, and we won't be as effective without local chambers, right? So there's a real interdependence there, and together we're always stronger.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like how you're kind of ending on that, because that's going to drift really well into my next question, and kind of great points, Dan and Chuck. You were talking about those relationships again, and that relationship where it comes from an advocacy level and how you deliver messages back and forth. But for let's put it, hundreds of local chambers out there that are listening to this podcast and wondering, how this all kind of fits together. But can you kind of dive a little bit deeper? You did some good points here, but can you get a little deeper into how a local chamber can effectively leverage the resources and the networks of the provincial chamber? And do you have any great success examples, some great success stories that when it comes to that collaboration that you can share?
I think in COVID was part of it, right? In terms of being able to provide programs and information to their local chambers, and some of the work that both the Ontario Chamber and our chamber does, as well as we recognize that a lot of local chambers may be 1 and 2 person operations. They're doing events, they're selling memberships, they're managing a board of directors, they're doing 10 different jobs. And so a big part of what they may not have the ability to do is on information. And you can take what's going on right now with all the tariff talk and all the information that your members are kind of looking for. What we're trying to do as provincial chambers is provide a vehicle to do that work on behalf of chambers and share that with them so that they're not all feeling like, okay, I've got to go out and find as much information on tariffs that I can share with my members. Those are kind of the roles that provincial chambers have the ability to play, to share that information, to take some of that workload off of the backs of those local chamber managers that maybe they don't have the ability. Maybe this is not in their wheelhouse in terms of where we can really support them. And so that's what's important, is that we both have teams that are there to support the local chambers of commerce. I need them to be successful. I need 65 local chambers that are engaged with their membership, that are continually growing, that are strong voices in their business community, because all it does is it really elevates the entire quality of the chamber network. And so that's part of the role that we play as well. So, some of the interesting things that, when I go into chambers, and I say this message a lot of times, and I say to local chamber managers, I don't run a local chamber of commerce. I don't know exactly what all of your issues are. And so I'm here to listen just as much. You need to tell me what some of the challenges you're having are, so that we as a provincial chamber can try to provide some of those supports for you. And some of those supports have been, more regular calls with the chamber. I mean, that's there's very few good things that you think came out of COVID, but one of them is we started to recognize Zoom was an opportunity.
Yeah.
And other than me running around the province trying to talk to as many chambers as I could, I had the ability to have conversations with them on a daily basis. And those are things that we continue to this day, is that we still hold sessions to find out what's on the minds of chambers, what some of their challenges are, and what they're kind of dealing with. The other thing that, we started putting into effect, and Stephen's an example of that. One of the things that I found is, what kind of a support mechanism does the chamber network need? And so Stephen had been in the role with the Parkland Chamber for 9 years, and obviously we're going to be sad to see him leave, but we hired him on a part-time basis as sort of doing outreach, because one of the things I was finding is that when you have turnover in the chamber network, it's much easier for someone to kind of go in and provide them with, how do I run a local chamber that's been successful doing that, rather than me coming in and saying, well, here's what you need to do and here's your template. It's providing them with some of those resources, which I think has been important. And then we've continually done, regular meetings, and we do regional meetings and different things, because we want to make sure, what supports they're going to need to kind of move forward so that they can be successful. And at the same time, if in some cases, telling them to stop doing certain things.
Right.
There's always been this, one of the big challenges I have with, with chambers a lot of times, and these are typically the ones that don't have staff, is they continually look at themselves as not-for-profits. And when they say not-for-profit, they have this intent that we're not allowed to make money. And I continually tell them, no, not-for-profit is more a set of, from an organizational standpoint, run your chamber like you would run a business.
A business, yeah.
Run your chamber. If you do an event that does not make money, stop doing it.
That's right.
If you're doing things that are not benefiting your business community, stop doing them. And so it's interesting that you get all these business people around a table running an organization, and then all of a sudden, when they become a chamber of commerce, they determine, well, we're not allowed to make money. Absolutely not. Make as much money you can, reinvest it into the business community. That needs to be the focus. So sometimes it's just those kind of reminders that you have to provide to chambers. And that's really the role that we try to play as well, to try to help make them be more successful.
Such a good point.
So Dan, for you, Ontario's got probably hundreds and hundreds of chambers, not all of whom are members of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. So what would your elevator pitch be to why join the Ontario Chamber? I mean, I know why we're members. I would never give it up, because it replaces a staff member for me, to Chuck's point. It creates a lot of shortcuts and just that community of support. But what would your pitch be to a chamber as to why spend the money?
Well, I would say that I'd come back to what I was saying before. I mean, together we are so much more powerful than any one of us can be alone, right? And I think it's important to remember that. And the way I look at it is, doesn't your community deserve a voice at the provincial and national table, right?
That's right.
It attracts attention, it attracts investment from government, it attracts focus on regions and communities, right? And so the more we can understand what the issues are in a local community, the more we can actually provide direct advocacy to provincial and federal decision makers to say, hey, here's an issue that's affecting, it could affect all communities, but often an issue will affect a certain number of communities or communities in a certain region because of their industrial base, for instance, right? And so if your community is dependent on natural resources, getting involved in our policy process could be really valuable in highlighting the opportunities for investors or for government policy to benefit your communities. If your base is manufacturing, same thing. If your base is life sciences, it doesn't matter what it is, or public services, education, right? There's always a connection because we're all interconnected and interdependent. And the way I look at it is, most members will not, miss a step, at a few extra dollars on their membership fee, and to be able to say to the members, well, this makes you indirectly a member in the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, which makes you part of a community of 60,000 businesses that are working together to support a stronger business community and a more business friendly environment in Ontario, right? And so, I really would say that local chambers don't know how powerful they are, and how powerful they can be. And the best ones, in my experience, understand this. And as a result, they punch way above their weight and they deliver benefits back to their community. Last thing is, I think, which you alluded to, Melanie, is I think there's a real efficiency gain, right? So to give you just two examples, very recently at the time we're talking, right? We just came through the Ontario election. We're in the middle of the latest, Trump tariff, crisis of the week. And, the day the provincial election launched, we had our Ontario election business priorities out there, right? The day that the first Trump tariffs, launched, we had some material out there about the top 10 things Ontario businesses need to do right now to protect themselves during this crisis. Mm-hmm. And when we create that material, we say to local chambers, rip it off, use it,
on my website right now. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's a lot less work when you've got really good, thoughtful content that you can quickly send out to your members, and you can say, look what we are doing. Yes. Right. Look at the advocacy that we are pushing out there. And if that doesn't save time and money, then we've got bigger issues. But what I hear overwhelmingly from chambers is it is valuable, right? And when our stuff doesn't hit the mark, we want to know, right? Because judge us on how well the work we're doing actually resonates, with your members, at the local level.
I think too, a lot of that, and we haven't touched on that, is affinity programs, right? So just the sheer bargaining power of the size of the provincial chambers, the local chambers get to plug into that.
Totally. And I will say one thing, actually, like, you mentioned earlier, there are many that aren't members of the Ontario Chamber. There are actually very few that are not members.
Oh, good.
And so that to me is a sign that, together we're doing something right? That the vast majority of chambers of commerce and boards of trade in Ontario, from, the largest, the Toronto Region Board of Trade, to, small volunteer run chambers in remote parts of the province, right? That they're proudly members of our provincial chamber, again, because they recognize that, we're all interconnected, we're all interdependent, and we can achieve more together than any one of us could achieve alone.
Yeah, for sure. So let's pivot a little bit to Chuck. You had touched on this. You'll go into a local chamber, and Dan, I'm sure you've done the same, where you might see where they're not leveraging the provincial relationship as well as they could be, or maybe not using that impact properly. Can you think of maybe some? You don't have to say which chamber it is, but can you give us some examples of where you see local chambers, like you said, punching above their weight and really making a mark because of their affiliation with the provincial chamber? Chuck, what about you?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot that take advantage of that. It's more so the chambers that you try to help, and that they, and look, and I think what happens in the chamber network as well, if and I always say to chambers, the tipping point for a chamber to become successful is when they get a staff person.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
typically have, volunteer-based chamber boards, you go into a community and you get some individuals that are extremely excited and they want to start the chamber and then they get it moving. The goal for me is always, how do I make it as easy as possible for them? And how do you kind of let them know, don't try to do everything at once, because you're going to burn yourself out, and in 2 years you're going to be in a different situation. And so it's having some of those conversations with them. So, one I recently had that conversation with is here in Manitoba was the Treehorn Chamber of Commerce. They had been a chamber that had been simply paying their dues, and they had some members, but had not been very engaged. I went out and spent a half day with them probably about a month and a half ago, sat down, toured their community, met with all the right individuals, had conversations with them. And I think they really, after that day, they started to kind of get it in terms of what the role for the chamber was, in terms of what that connection with the Manitoba Chamber of Commerce could be. And so there's a number of things that we do. We do, Provincial Advocacy Day, where we provide an opportunity where we connect all of our local chambers. We bring them into Winnipeg. We set up an entire day with different ministers and then a business reception. I think they really got an opportunity to see the connections that can be made for their community through events like that. And these are the kind of things that I know that they can take back and go, oh, now I kind of get kind of the role that the chamber can play on specific advocacy issues, on what kind of influence they can help with us. So I think that ends up being a big part of this as well. But at the same time, part of the conversations we were able to have with them is on what type of events they should be potentially looking at, what type of initiatives they should get involved with, and again, looking at it from that perspective of, stop thinking of yourself as a not-for-profit, think of yourself as a chamber of commerce and business organization. And sometimes it's just that reminder that they need, and that validation from the provincial chamber, I think, is helpful. Again, even if, some of them look at it, and I never think of it as a big deal for myself to, yesterday the Altona Chamber asked me to come out and do a keynote address. For me, it's not a big, it's something, it's an hour away, it's a drive. It's, I'm happy to go out and do it, but the community makes a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
It's a big deal when we come out and speak, and the local media show up and the mayor's there and they're all thrilled that we're coming, and they see that as a big deal.
Yeah.
And it always speaks well for the local chamber of commerce. And at the same time, I went and, met with a couple of local business owners as well, and just had conversations with them. We downplay the kind of the role of our provincial chamber of commerce we have. I mean, I typically do to a certain extent, but we get this access that very few others get. And, Daniel and I had it earlier this week. We go to Toronto, have the opportunity to meet with, Premier Ford and Premier of Nova Scotia, and then the work that we've done and the push that we put out is starting to influence government across Canada. And I think that's the importance that the network can potentially play. And these are the things that we need to continually communicate to the local chambers in terms of the influence that our organization has.
So it's storytelling, right? It's telling that story and not keeping it a secret.
Yeah. I agree with Chuck, and like two things he alluded to are identical, to opportunities that I think we provide here for local chambers, right? And those two were like when local chambers come to us and when we go to them, right, are really good examples of that, right? So we also, as you know, Melanie, since you've been a great participant in this, we have our advocacy day every year, right, where we bring our local chambers from across Ontario to Queen's Park, to the Ontario legislature, and we meet with senior cabinet ministers, we meet with leaders, we meet with opposition parties and leaders, and it's a great day. People told me when we did it last year, we had 100 people from local chambers across Ontario come, right? And so when we organize those, we can deploy people. Okay, let's say you're interested in meeting with the minister for small business, or you're interested in meeting with the minister of the environment, or whatever it is, right? Like, it's identifying whom do you want to meet with, right? How can we then create that opportunity? And so you're sitting there in a small group with a senior cabinet minister, and you can say, let me tell you about an issue that our community is facing, right? That like that sort of door opening is really, really powerful, right? Because it's not just one minister or MPP that you get to see. It's a whole bunch you get to see, and you get to meet all the party leaders all in one efficient day.
Mhm.
The reverse Chuck also alluded to is when we come to you, right? And I've been I keep a rough account on my phone, right? So I'm up to I think 43 on this date, early March 2025. In 13 months on the job, I've been to 43 local chamber events across Ontario. And for me, that's very valuable in terms of learning and stories and examples of local successes or challenges that I can bring into the advocacy work I do with ministers and premiers and others. But also, I view my job at those events as very simple. I'm there to highlight the benefit
Mhm.
of being a member of your chamber in your community, right?
Love
And
that.
to connect the work that's done at the local level and their membership
Mhm.
to the impact that the local chamber is having at the provincial level, right? And so, that I think is important. And as Chuck said, it's great to see the turnout when we do these kinds of events. I mean, other stuff I would say to your question is think about participating in our research, right? We do our annual Ontario economic report. We
Yeah.
actively invite our chambers to send out the survey to their members, so that we get a really representative response and can feed that back to you. Participate in programs some of which actually bring revenue
Revenue.
to your
Yeah.
local chambers, right? I think of the chambers plan, for instance, group insurance, right? So like the more we're participating in advocacy policy programs, the more local chambers will benefit from knowledge and advocacy and revenue and impact, right? And so it's uh, it's a powerful proposition, I think, when leveraged properly.
I'll tell a quick story if it's okay regarding Advocacy Day. So I sat on our board before I became a paid chamber person. I'm not sure which was harder, but it depends on the day. But I remember my first times going to Advocacy Day as a volunteer and really being struck by not only the caliber of people in the room, especially when it came to how well they knew their local communities. And it's so funny. One of my first advocacy days, I got to sit down with Giles Gerson when he was working as a deputy minister for the government. And now he's, CEO of the Toronto Board of Trade. So I think that's a really interesting connection that someone very powerful at a government level sees the value of working for a chamber. But even last year at Advocacy Day, I got to sit down with, Todd Smith, who was the Minister of Energy at the time, and I was able to take that story back to a couple of my key stakeholders who are energy companies in our community and tell them what I had said on their behalf. I didn't make a big splash in social media about it. It wasn't a press release, but I whispered the right things in the right ears, which in turn makes us a more valuable partner to them when it comes to events and sponsorship and all of that good stuff. So there's a lot of value in plugging into those kinds of events.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And from another local chamber in that regard is thankful for provincial chambers for putting some programs like that together. And to even so you got that big grand of a day where you can get a lot done and you bring a lot of people all together, but also too for any local chambers out there listening, or the hundreds that are listening to this audience, right? That if you need a one-off meeting or some sort of connection, if you're not getting a word back from government, to lean on the provincial chamber to try to get that relationship open or that line of communication, right?
Yeah.
Even during COVID, I did that.
The other thing that we find as well, and this it and I talk about this a lot, the chamber network is very unique. And then
Mm.
we find other associations that are more, specific to, manufacturing or others.
Yeah,
A lot of times they're reaching out to us because they want access to certain communities,
right.
or they
Exactly.
have programs that they're looking to get into a Dauphin or a parkland, or businesses are looking, can you make an introduction to that? So that happens on almost a daily basis as well, which is why I think the chamber network is so well positioned that, even government to a certain extent, if they have certain programs or they need to get into a community or they're wanting to know who do I need to talk to, we typically have that ability to provide them with those connections that they can't always have. And so it's almost a daily basis. Organizations are reaching out saying, I want to do more with the provincial network or the local chamber network because I need access. And how can I get that access? And there's very few organizations that are, not specific to a sector or sector agnostic or community agnostic that we can get access to that. I can reach out and I can talk to someone in Churchill, or I can talk to someone in Brandon, or someone in Gimli, and find those connections on their behalf, which
Yeah.
is something that's extremely unique as well.
Yeah, very helpful. It moves mountains for sure. I'm curious to dive into this one, but I'm sure a lot of, especially we know through our networks that a lot of folks are new in their roles when they're staff at chambers. But and you've kind of touched on a few of these points already, but let's maybe kind of bring this all together. But and we've talked about how your provincial chambers are supporting local chambers, but can we flip that? How are local chambers able to better serve or position themselves to support a provincial chamber to make that network even stronger? Well,
Yeah, I
anyone?
mean, I'm happy to kind of start on this one as well. I mean, and it's the way the chamber network is set up, right? And this can be from some the revenue situation for provincial chambers, right? I mean, the way it works is that in Manitoba, for instance, you have to be a member of a local chamber of commerce before you can be a member of a Manitoba Chamber of Commerce, right? So there's no that's in our bylaws. There's no way around that. And so, we're sort of an add-on, and then the Canadian Chamber would be typically an add-on for that. And so how we operate, we receive revenue dues from, local chambers, something that I have refused to increase in the last decade. It's still the same as it was the day I started.
I think ours is too.
My intent is not to increase dues on local chambers of commerce. It's to focus on other revenue sources. Some of those other revenue sources are companies that are going to see value in terms of being involved with the provincial body. And so those kind of members are typically not 1 and 2 person operations. They're larger companies that might be in your communities that you as a local chamber could say, you know what, I think, so-and-so company, you're going to get greater value in some of the things that our provincial chamber is doing based on the advocacy work that they're doing, the connections they're providing. And so that's where there can be some help. So for organizations like ourselves, we'll sometimes have very few members in certain communities. And, you talked earlier, the dues structure is one that, is not problematic for some companies, but sometimes it's an introduction as well in terms of the work that we're doing. So it can work both ways in my mind. We're trying to provide as much support as possible. But again, the more revenue the local chamber has, the more revenue the provincial chamber has, the more that we can do on your behalf, right? So those are some of the things that, how local chambers can work. Again, when we're doing sort of the advocacy work, whether it's, sending surveys out to your members as well, those are things that are important. Continuing to provide your provincial chamber with that feedback in terms of here's what's going on in my community. That kind of research and that kind of information is absolutely gold because it helps tell those stories when I'm meeting with the premier or I'm sitting around these trade council tables and everybody's talking sort of anecdotally, and I can give a specific example of a business that I met in Altona, Manitoba. Here's what they're doing in regards to the tariff situation, and it can sometimes tweak the way we're going to develop a policy or we're going to develop some programs as a result of that. So that information is just critical. So if you have members that are, potentially have solutions or they're really challenged with something and the local chamber is not able to help them, feed them up to us and we'll see what we can do to make those connections on their behalf.
Yeah. I think those are great points. And, I think that the most effective chambers are really, really good at participating in the work we're doing provincially on a wide range of levels, right? I alluded earlier, participate in our research, participate in our SME programs when there are opportunities to do so. There's often revenue available, when we do that. Participate in the chamber's plan, right? And work with us to help market it, right? There again, direct revenue benefit. Share our content. So when we produce policy content or social media content, adapt it if you want to, or send it out directly. Use it, right? Like just to show uh, the value of the chamber, to members. Connect if you have larger members. I think Chuck alluded to this: larger members, larger companies that have interests at the provincial level. Connect them to us, right? So that we can help them, right? I mean, again, they will be grateful to you when that happens. And the worst thing, the thing that bugs me the most, and it doesn't happen often, it happens, very, very rarely, but is when there's a feeling that, oh, well, we're in competition with the provincial chamber, for our members, right? If someone's a member at the provincial level, they're not going to be a member at the local level. Like that is if that happens, if that ever happened, it would only be because they don't see value in one level or the other, right? You know what I mean? Like, if they want connection to the community and want to be show their support for the local business community, if they have local issues, right, they're going to be involved in the local chamber,
Right.
right? If the local chamber is doing its job. If they have provincial issues that are important to them, they've got regulatory concerns, they've got interests that Queens Park can help them with, they should be involved in the provincial chamber. Same thing at the federal level. And so, we're always going to be stronger when we work together. And we will always say, as Chuck just said, first and foremost, join your local chamber, right? Join your local chamber. I think also participate in our advocacy, right? And so when we're looking for support and endorsements, when we're looking for people to come to advocacy day, when we're organizing our annual meeting, where we go through policy priorities and you can vote on the policy priorities of the Ontario Chamber, participate in that. And I guess, just finally, I'd say, there's an opportunity more broadly, I think, just to maximize impact for all of us, just by marketing the fact that you're part of this network, right? And I think local members should understand the incredible value of that.
We do that in our newsletter. Whenever I share Ontario Chamber or Canadian Chamber, I have a little header that says, by being a member of the Halton Hills Chamber of Commerce, you are able to, I don't know the exact wording, but you get the gist. You also get access to Canadian Chamber and Ontario Chamber. But you gave me an idea there, Dan. When I and Chuck, when I share information, on a social media or on LinkedIn, I should probably reference that, you're getting this because as a member of the Halton Hills Chamber, you're also a member of the Ontario Chamber, to just to close that loop for people. Because I think what happens, and I know Steve, you probably get this too, a lot of people think we're all government, right? That
Yeah,
the
yeah.
the chambers at whatever level are getting funding that make them equivalent to government, and we're not, right? It's a member-based organization.
Yeah, and I thought, and one other thing occurs to me that I didn't mention, but you alluded to it earlier, I think, and that's uh, participate in our town halls and the peer-to-peer stuff we do, because I
Mhm.
think that's some of the most, I'd be interested in your comments on it, Melanie and Stephen as well. But I find that the peer networking is so valuable, right? Like, because you learn from your peers, you hear what they're talking about, you learn about best practices, and I kind of find that the more you give, the more you get, right? The more you share, the more you get back in relationships and knowledge. And so that's how we raise standards. That's how we share knowledge. That's how we build a thriving professional community within the chamber network, and ultimately how we develop and recommend policy that's in the public interest, locally and provincially.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that, Dan. Because at least in Manitoba, that's what we're trying to do at Chuck. We have a bi-weekly call that happens with the network, so we have an opportunity to share and collaborate that way. And then from a provincial executive group, just trying to dri drive some more, create more opportunity for conversations to be had.
Yeah.
And anybody listening out there, we have a session in there. It's called a hard 30. So for 30 minutes, start and stop, no matter what conversation's happening at the end, we talk about a certain topic for only 30 minutes. So we get all come together and hash that out. I want to go back to how sharing updates about uh, provincial or even Canadian chamber updates. I put those in my report for board meetings.
Oh, to your board. That's smart.
Do they click on the link? Do they actually read any of the newsletters or content? I don't know, but it's there. So
Yeah.
hopefully, like educating the people that are around the table, that we are part of a system, and this is what Manitoba's doing. This is what Canadian Chamber is doing, and especially when it comes to dues time, there could be some small local chambers out there going, "Why do I pay this Canadian Chamber membership? They're so far away from us. We're disconnected." Well, this is why, because these are the things that they're doing. So
That's great.
you can even go foundational
Yeah.
and make sure that your board is aware of some of this stuff.
Yeah.
But you're right about the sharing of resources. We had our town hall this week, Dan, for Ontario. I brought up something, in regards to, connections and relationships with council and our mayor. And within literally 10 minutes, I had 5 emails from people with documentation that I could R&D, rob and deploy to use for and so it shortcuts things for me. But more importantly, and this is why Steve and I started this podcast, it reinforces the community that we have. And I love that you talk about a community of professionals, because it is a profession. It's not, meant to be it's not meant to be just a job that you happen to get in your local community. So I love that you reference that. So we're wrapping up. I could talk to you both for days, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to have a glass of wine maybe at the Canadian Chamber as you, because it's in Mississauga this year, the Canadian Chamber AGM.
Well, the Ontario one is first in.
Yes, I'll be in Windsor. Don't worry.
Windsor.
Booking my train. Okay, so let's think ahead. So, the chamber movement has been around for centuries, as we know. But where do you see chambers, the evolution of the chamber network in the next 5 years? What should local chambers be thinking of? Because you have a lens that probably looks further down the highway than we're able to. What should we be thinking of to be more relevant, more impactful to our communities? What changes should we be looking at making? Chuck?
I don't necessarily think it's changes so much. I think it's focus. And I think it's
Okay.
looking at things from the perspective of your members. What do my members want? And I think that's the interesting thing about member-based organizations, is that you continually make, whether it's those pivots as an organization. But when I talk to chambers, I always talk to them about focus on who your members are and what's going to help them grow their business, or what's going to be to them. So when you go into a local chamber and you find out the type of events, or you find out the type of things that they're investing in, and it doesn't align with that sort of narrative in terms of does this benefit the business community, that's when you just need to tweak it just a little bit. I mean, I think the chamber network continues to be extremely relevant, extremely strong. It's important in every single community. It's focusing on some of the good work that they're doing. It's in some of the is sometimes what I find in local chambers is they undervalue themselves. And they go in and you go, okay, what's your membership dues? $50 for a year? Like, no, like you're undervaluing the support you're doing. Your local businesses can afford more than $50 a year. And you might take a little bit of time to get there, but the more revenue that local chambers have, the more that they can do.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think what you're going to find as well is that chambers are starting to come to a bit of a realization as well, in terms of, whether it's regional chamber models as well can be more beneficial, and, encouraging them to have some of those conversations that, if your chamber's, 15 minutes away from another chamber, are there things that you can be doing together and working together? And so we're trying to encourage some of that as well. But at the end of the day, the chamber network's been around for over 100 years. It at its core is it's supporting businesses, whether that's through the events, whether that's through the programs, whether that's just through networking. And I tell examples all the time of the benefits that you can have from a chamber. And it can be simple as just a networking event where you get 2 people in the room. And my message to them is, get your business cards out, do business with each other. That's the value you're going to find in your local chamber of commerce. And those are some of the things that you just need to continually remind them of.
Yeah.
Know who your members are, know what kind of value that you're getting from them, and then deliver that. And don't try to do too much.
Yeah.
Sometimes chambers have a focus of doing too much and they burn themselves out as a result. Focus on what you think your members are going to be, and you'll get there eventually.
Yeah, I totally agree, and and obviously there are challenges that we all face. There are some challenges that are more acute in some communities for some chambers, but if I look high level at how this thing, should evolve and can evolve at its best, right? Like I completely agree with Chuck about not being afraid to charge for the value that's being provided, right? And I think too many. One thing I've learned from some great local chambers is that the ones that struggle are often getting into conversations with members about what have you done for me in the last year, right? How much revenue have you brought my business, right? And frankly, members who are focused on that should not be our target, right? Because that's not why you join a chamber. You join a chamber, and I've been saying this a lot lately, for one of two reasons that are very, very simple. One is you consider yourselves a leader in the local business community and the broader community itself. Number two, option number two, you're not a leader yet, but you aspire to be a leader, right?
Oh,
and so right in the end, it's a sign, and we've got to market it this way boldly, right? It's a sign of leadership, right? So signing up and being a member of your local chamber, it is your commitment to your community.
mm,
It is also something that builds your reputation, it builds your brand, it builds the value of your business at the local level and beyond the local level, right? So that I think that's the starting point. It's got to be marketing around this idea of community leadership. And then in terms of how we're going to work, I think we need to become more of as a provincial network, provincial chamber network. We need to market ourselves and to actually be not just market ourselves, but actually achieve the status of being the gateway to the Ontario SME community. So if government wants to engage the Ontario SME community, they come through our network. If big brands or companies that have services to market that are genuinely valuable to our members, because we never want to waste members' time with stuff that's not valuable, but they want to market products and services that are going to add value to local chambers or to local businesses, come through us, right? And there's revenue in that for local chambers and for the provincial chamber, and for the end business consumer, right? And so we're helping our members. I think we're going to have an opportunity to broaden our business recognition programs to, you look at all these awards, right? I think there's an opportunity to connect the awards that we give locally and provincially, right? So that we're recognizing the best and brightest businesses. And I guess last thing I'll say right now is I think we've got to get better at mobilizing through advocacy, right? And so tighter, faster, digitally enabled advocacy, whereby we can very quickly push a button, get a survey out to every chamber, every member of every chamber in Ontario. What do they think about today's budget, or what do they think about the tariff announcement? What's the number one priority in our advocacy? Right, governments will be intensely interested. Media will be intensely interested in what the answer to that question is.
that's right.
And then flipping it around, when we want to campaign, we need to be effective as other grassroots organizations are in very quickly mobilizing people and saying, okay, this election needs to be about business competitiveness and prosperity. And so here are the three asks we have. Join our campaign, right? And we need to be thinking more that way.
Mm-hmm.
As not just conveners of dialogue, but mobilizers of business to affect positive change.
Yeah. And I think part of what you both said rings true for me is seeing your own value, looking back to dues when I took over in my role. Don't tell my members, but we've had 3 straight years of double-digit increases on our dues because we had, and no one noticed, but because we had had 10 years of no revenue growth at our dues level. And you can't afford to provide services if you can't afford to pay your staff at the end of the day. And I've had a couple people maybe have maybe noticed, but they're not for us then, because we're not, I'm not interested in transactional relationships like that. We're here when you need us, and thank God you might not need us this year, but like during COVID and during this time, you need organizations like the chamber. So it's an insurance policy.
And I would say I love that. And I the only amendment I would make is you need us all year round.
Yeah.
Right? Because no, seriously, because
Yeah.
it's like, we talk about organizations talk about public relations, right? Public relations isn't just something you do, when there's a crisis or when you have an announcement to make, right? It's something like by definition, it's building your reputation by investing in the relationships with those around you, with your customers, your employees, your
Mhm.
suppliers, your stakeholders, your community, right? And
Oh, I love
so,
that.
yeah, and so being involved in your chamber, coming to events and participating and being seen and learning from others, that's value all year round, right?
Yeah,
And so the idea that you wouldn't, well, I think we got to get to the point where someone actually thinks it would be absolutely crazy
to
for
not
me
be.
not to be active in my chamber, or
Mhm.
if I can't go myself, to send one of my team, right, to these events and things, because at every single event the chamber has, there's a business opportunity for
Yeah,
me, or at minimum an opportunity to enhance our standing and our reputation, which has business value. Because when I go to sell my business, you know one's what with reputation and the value of
right.
our brand, it's one of your greatest assets. So this is your investment in your business, and
Those
it
are
would,
hats. We're all going to get those embroidered on hats,
Yeah.
yeah.
right?
And if it's transactional, like, did they, sure, maybe they didn't save dollars because they were with your chamber. Maybe they didn't make more money because they were with your chamber, but did they like going to the restaurant that's still open because you have an immigration program running and they have
Mm,
staff? Or did they like that their streets are, cleared in the winter because the community or the province, maybe they were having struggles doing it or not doing it fast enough, and you advocated to make sure that, stores are accessible, whatever the case may be, like there's, it's a community as a whole. It's not, like dive down to just that transaction between one member and the chamber. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for spending probably is what a very busy time for you with us this morning. I just have to say the work that you do and the help that you give to local chambers in each of your communities is noticed, and that's why aside from Dan, you're mine, and Chuck, you're Steve's because you're Manitoba and Ontario. You both really do stand out as leaders, and we were so pleased that you agreed to be on the podcast. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks
Our
very
pleasure.
much.
Our pleasure.
All right, we're going to sign off. Thanks.